My husband hid a secret family for 15 years. The truth broke everything. Hook. The day I found out my husband had another family, I wasn't looking for clues. I was looking for a goddamn can opener. The problem. The drawer in our kitchen in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, had jammed again. 30 years of marriage, 3 kids raised, 2 grandkids born, and we still couldn't get a new drawer slide. I yanked hard. The whole thing came out. And behind it, wedged against the wall where dust bunnies go to die, was a photograph. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, blonde pigtails, gap-toothed smile, holding a sign that said, "Happy Father's Day, Daddy." I stared at it until my vision blurred. Our daughters were brunettes. Our son had my husband's dark curls. None of them had ever called him Daddy. They called him Dad. Always Dad. My hands started shaking before my brain caught up. "Mark?" I called out, my voice sounding like someone else's. "Mark, come here." He didn't answer. He was in the garage, probably organizing his fishing lures for the 1,000th time, the way he did when he needed to think. The way he'd done every Sunday for 15 years. Every Sunday. I looked at the photo again, the date stamp in the corner, June 15th, 2008. Father's Day. The same Father's Day. Mark had told me he was driving to Des Moines for a men's retreat with his college buddies. The same retreat he'd gone to every June since 2003, every single June. My knees hit the linoleum. The photo fluttered from my fingers, and somewhere in the distance I heard my husband's heavy boots on the garage steps. Heard him humming that old Garth Brooks song he always hummed when he was happy. Heard him call out, "Babe, you won't believe the walleye Jim caught last weekend." And I thought, I don't know this man at all. Suspense and emotion. I didn't confront him that night. I don't know why. Maybe because 30 years is a long time to build a life, and you don't tear down a cathedral with a sledgehammer. You study the cracks first. You trace the foundation. You pray you're wrong. So, I became someone I didn't recognize. I checked his phone while he showered. I memorized credit card statements. I drove past the address on the back of that photograph. A modest blue house in Davenport, 90 minutes east, the kind of place where people leave porch lights on for each other. The first time I saw her, I almost drove into a mailbox. She was getting groceries out of a Subaru. Late 30s, maybe. Pretty in a tired way, the way women get when they're doing everything alone. She had the little girl with her. The blonde from the photo, now a teenager with braces and an Iowa Hawkeyes hoodie, and a boy, younger, maybe 10, kicking a soccer ball against the garage. I sat in my car for 40 minutes, watching them like a Netflix show I couldn't pause. When Mark's silver F-150 turned onto their street at 6:47 p.m., exactly 6:47, because Mark was always exactly on time, I felt my heart detach from my body and float somewhere above the steering wheel. He got out of the truck. The boy ran to him. "Dad!" he screamed. And Mark, my Mark, the man who'd held my hand through my mother's funeral, who'd cried when our first daughter was born, who'd built our deck with his own 2 hands, he scooped that boy up like he'd been doing it forever. The teenager hung back, smiling. The woman, her, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, not angry, just waiting. Like this was normal. Like this was Sunday. I drove home in a daze. I made meatloaf. I set the table for 2. When Mark walked in at 9:30, smelling like outside air and something else, her perfume maybe, or just the absence of me, he kissed my cheek and said, "Long drive back from Des Moines." Those guys, I swear. I served him meatloaf. I asked about his day. I smiled when he told me about Jim's walleye story, the same story he told me that morning, and I thought, how many times have you told her my stories? How many times have you laughed at her jokes and then come home and laughed at mine? That night I lay in bed listening to him snore, the same snore that had lulled me to sleep for 3 decades, and I made a plan. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't tell my sister in Omaha who would have driven over with a baseball bat. I did something worse. I got to know them. I started small, the grocery store in Davenport where I'd accidentally bump into her cart, the coffee shop where she'd grab a latte before work, the soccer field where I'd sit in my car with sunglasses on, watching Mark coach that boys' team in a shirt I'd never seen him wear. Her name was Claire. She was a dental hygienist. She'd grown up in Moline, Illinois, just across the Mississippi. She'd met Mark at a Cubs game in 2003, the same year our youngest started high school, the same year Mark started working late on Tuesdays, the same year I told myself I was being paranoid when I smelled unfamiliar perfume on his collar. Claire thought Mark was divorced. She thought his ex-wife lived in Cedar Rapids and was difficult about visitation. She thought he paid child support through some complicated arrangement. She thought, God help her, she was his second chance at love. I wanted to hate her. I tried, but she was kind to the elderly lady at the coffee shop. She volunteered at the food bank. She had a laugh that sounded like wind chimes, and I hated that I noticed. The boy was named Ethan. The teenager was Lily. They had Mark's eyes. They had his stubborn chin. They called him Dad, and he answered like it was the most natural word in the world. And every Sunday, while I sat in my empty house in Cedar Rapids, Mark sat in theirs. He helped with homework. He grilled burgers. He tucked Ethan in and told Lily she was beautiful and kissed Claire like he meant it. I watched it all. I documented it all. I became a ghost haunting my own marriage. The confrontation didn't happen the way it does in movies. There were no slam doors, no thrown plates, no dramatic reveals in crowded restaurants. It happened on a Tuesday in October, the kind of Iowa Tuesday where the sky is gray and the wind smells like burning leaves. Mark came home from work at 7 p.m., and I was sitting at the kitchen table with the photograph, the credit card statements, the notes I'd taken, and a meatloaf that had gone cold 3 hours ago. He saw my face. He saw the papers. He stopped in the doorway like he'd hit a glass wall. Sarah, he said. Just my name. Like that explained everything. Like that was an apology. How long? I asked. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. He didn't pretend not to understand. Mark had many faults, but he was never stupid. He pulled out the chair across from me, the chair where our grandchildren sat at Thanksgiving, the chair where he'd sat when he told me he got the promotion, the chair where he'd held my hands and promised forever, and he told me the truth. 15 years, since 2003, since that Cubs game, since Claire smiled at him over a beer and he forgot he was a husband, a father, a man who'd stood in a church in Dubuque and vowed before God and everyone we loved. I never meant for it to last, he said, his voice cracking. It was just, she was different. She needed me. And then Ethan was born, and Lily was growing up, and I couldn't. Sarah, I couldn't abandon them. But you could abandon me? The words came out whispered, not shouted. You could abandon our daughters? You could lie to everyone for 15 years? I didn't abandon you, he said. And there were tears on his face, real tears, the kind I'd seen when his father died, when our dog had to be put down. I love you. I've always loved you. I made a mistake.
And it got bigger, and I didn't know how to stop it. A mistake. I laughed then, and it sounded like breaking glass. Mark, a mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is denting the car. You built a life. You have a son who calls you dad. You have a woman who thinks you're her future. You have... I gestured at the papers, at the photo, at the 30 years of us reduced to evidence. You have everything, and you risked it all because you couldn't choose. He reached for my hand. I pulled away. I did choose, he said quietly. I chose you. Every time I came home. Every time I kissed you goodnight. Every time I sat in that truck driving back from Davenport, hating myself, knowing I was going to lose everything. Sarah, I chose you. Then why didn't you stop? I asked. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me go? He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, and it was too ugly to say out loud. Because he was selfish. Because he wanted both. Because he was a small man who'd found a way to feel big by being needed by two women who deserved so much better. I stood up. I walked to the bedroom we'd shared since 1994, the room where we'd made love and fought and made up, where I'd nursed our babies and held him when he lost his job and celebrated when he got a better one. I packed a bag, just clothes, just enough. Where are you going? He asked from the doorway, his face gray, his hand shaking. To tell Claire the truth, I said. She thinks you're divorced. She thinks she's your second chance. She deserves to know she's your lie. Sarah, please. And then I'm going to tell our daughters that their father has a brother and sister they never met. I'm going to tell them that every Father's Day, every Christmas, every moment they thought he was theirs, he was splitting himself in half. And then I zipped the bag, shouldered it, looked at the stranger wearing my husband's face. And then I'm going to figure out who I am without you. I drove to Davenport that night. The blue house had a light on. Claire answered the door in pajamas, holding a mug of tea, and when she saw my face, when she saw the 30 years of grief and rage and something worse, something like pity, she knew. "You're Sarah," she whispered. "I'm Sarah," I confirmed, "and we need to talk." We sat on her porch. The October wind blew leaves across her lawn. She cried. I didn't. She asked questions I couldn't answer. I asked questions she couldn't. We discovered, in the wreckage of our shared catastrophe, that we were both good women who'd loved a bad man, that we'd both been kind when we should have been fierce, that we'd both settled for crumbs because we'd forgotten what a full meal felt like. When the sun came up, we were still talking. When Mark's truck turned onto the street at 6:47 a.m., because of course he came, because of course he couldn't let us talk without him, Claire and I were holding hands, not as friends, not yet, maybe never, but as two women who'd been broken by the same hands and were choosing, finally, to put ourselves back together. Mark died 6 months later. Heart attack. Massive. He was driving back from Davenport on a Sunday night, and his truck drifted into a cornfield outside Wilton. The police said he was probably gone before the vehicle stopped moving. I found out because Claire called me. She'd been tracking his location, the way I used to. She'd seen the truck stop moving, she'd driven out and found him, and she'd held his hand while the ambulance came, and she'd called me from the hospital parking lot to tell me he was gone. I didn't cry at the funeral. Our daughters did. Ethan and Lily did, standing awkwardly with a family they'd never known, the half-siblings who looked like them and didn't know what to say. Claire stood in the back, wearing black, and when our eyes met, she nodded once. After the service, she found me by the grave. The Iowa spring was trying to happen, green shoots pushing through brown earth, the kind of stubborn hope that defines the Midwest. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about why I stayed, even after I knew." I waited. Mark told me. He told me you were sick, that you had early onset dementia, that the men's retreats were actually him visiting you in a facility, that he couldn't bring himself to tell the kids, that he needed me to give him a reason to keep going. She laughed, bitter and broken. "I stayed because I thought I was helping him survive losing you. I stayed because I thought I was the kindness in his life." I stared at her. "I never had dementia. I've never been sick a day in my life." "I know that now," she said. "But for 15 years, I thought I was loving a man who was sacrificing everything to care for a dying wife. I thought—" She wiped her eyes. "I thought I was the other woman. But I thought I was the kind other woman, the one who understood, who gave him peace." And there it was, the final twist in a story that had already broken me. Mark hadn't just lied to us. He'd weaponized our kindness. He'd turned our compassion into chains. He'd made Claire believe she was a saint and me believe I was paranoid. And in doing so, he'd kept us both exactly where he wanted us. Loving him, needing him, forgiving him. "He told me he loved me," Claire said softly. "Did he tell you?" "Every day," I said. "For 30 years. We stood there, two women who'd been played by the same maestro, and for the first time, I felt something other than rage. I felt pity. For her. For me. Even, God help me, for Mark, who'd been so terrified of being alone that he'd built a prison of love and called it a life." Closing note. It's been 2 years now. Claire and I aren't friends exactly, but we're something. We have coffee sometimes. We compare notes, the way veterans compare war stories. Ethan calls me on my birthday. Lily texts me memes. Our daughters have met their half-siblings, and it's awkward, and it's painful, and it's something. I sold the house in Cedar Rapids. I bought a little place in Galena, Illinois, just over the Mississippi, with a porch that looks west toward Iowa and everything I left behind. I garden. I volunteer at the animal shelter. I go to church on Sundays. Real church. Not the kind where you hide from yourself. I'm learning to be alone without being lonely. I'm learning that kindness isn't a weakness, even when it's exploited. I'm learning that 30 years of love doesn't disappear just because it was built on lies. It just becomes something else. Grief, wisdom, caution, hope. Claire moved to Minneapolis with the kids. She got her degree. She's dating a man who doesn't make her feel like a secret. We text sometimes. How are you? Hanging in there. You deserve better. So do you. And we do. We deserve better. Every person watching this, every heart that's been broken by someone who smiled while they lied, every soul that's questioned their own kindness because someone used it against them, you deserve better. Don't let one person's cowardice make you small. Don't let betrayal turn your compassion into armor. Love loudly. Trust carefully. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Because the truth, however much it breaks you, is the only foundation worth building on. To everyone who stayed until the end, thank you. Your time matters. Your heart matters. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, if it made you think of someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, subscribe for more emotional American stories. Hit that notification bell. Leave a comment if you've ever had to rebuild from something you didn't break. Share this with someone who needs to know that kindness isn't weakness, and that the truth, once spoken, sets us free. Good luck out there. Be gentle with yourselves. And remember, the best stories aren't the ones where nothing bad happens. They're the ones where good people keep going anyway. Subscribe, stay kind, stay strong. We'll see you next time.